And hello!
Yeah, Dallas asked for a tug job and to start the video off. That's what he's looking for here.
Literally, everybody watching this, Dallas's final words before the broadcast. And if he's going to keep up that mood, hopefully his final words ever.
Welcome, everybody, to the MMA Vivisection. I'm Dallas Winston. Oh, that's a big stretch. Sorry, I'm a little groggy today. My comical cohorts today from BloodyElbow.com are Connor Rubish. Connor, how are you?
I'm great, Dallas. Not bored or flat at all. How about you?
Whatever. Zane Simon, tell us how you are today.
I'm doing great, but I'm really not, I'm not available for the kind of things that you're asking for right now, Dallas.
Yeah, we're all laughing and yucking it up, but that's standard pre-show request, so it's nothing out of the norm.
Hey, I've been there for you for a while now. I'm just saying today, I'm sick of it.
Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? Made a strong case there. I would never do that because I have so much in the past. Today, I'm taking a day off. All right, we're gonna talk about Ultimate Fight Night 58. It's happening in Brazil. Headliner is Lyoto the Dragon Machida versus the somewhat resurgent CB Dollaway. I guess general thoughts on the card overall, gentlemen, because the reason I had that pre-show request for either of you guys, really, I'm easy. I don't know. It's not terrible, but it definitely didn't grab me. What do you think, Zane?
I am actually looking forward to pretty much all of this card. There's a fight here or there that, I don't even know. There's not a fight on this I'm looking at that I'm like, this fight's really gonna suck. There's some fights that may not be super high level, but probably the worst potential bout is Hakran Diaz Darren Elkins. That would probably be the one bout where I'm like, oh, nothing's gonna happen there. But the rest of the card, I'm excited to watch Machida fight and Barao fight and Silverio Magomedov. There's a lot of fights on here that I'm really actually looking forward to.
And interesting, Diaz and Elkins fairly relevant, amongst the most relative as far as the division, don't you guys think, between those two?
Oh, of the undercard, they're probably the most currently relevant fighters. Maybe not with the most potential, but...
Yeah, they're certainly the biggest names on the undercard, but they're not fighters that I show up for.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's expecting a highlight reel, but even on the entire card, you'd have to probably put them over Cummings and Eric Silva and Ninamaki at this point, huh? Just me?
I don't know about that. Over Ninamaki, sure, but over Cummings and Silva, unfortunately, both of them in their respective divisions are pretty close to the top 15, and Darren Elkins he's there. He's in the top 15 for featherweight, but I'm not it's that sort of top 15, you're never going to fight for a title, so you're kind of a placeholder until somebody better comes along ranking.
He's an absolute gatekeeper. He's the gatekeeper in the division as far as I see it.
Mm-hmm.
A little more proven against some of the other top contenders, perhaps.
No, he's a tough gatekeeper. He does a good job.
He's a great fighter. I always say every division needs their blanket to make fighters prove that they can actually do things like counter wrestle and keep guys off of them. If you can't fight the blanket and win, then who's giving you a title shot? Well, except for Conor McGregor, because he's good like that.
Connor, are you digging this card then? Medium?
I'm down with it. This is kind of the prototypical fight night card to me. I think that this is just kind of what I expect. I'm a little disappointed that Machida is headlining here rather than being on a pay-per-view or something, but on the other hand, Machida just fought for a title. He's not going to fight for a title again anytime really soon, unless the six people log jammed at the top of the division all get injured and they need somebody to fight Weidman. So, just kind of what I would expect. They're putting Machida headlining a smaller card. At least he still gets to headline, and he's against one of the less interesting people at the top of middleweight right now. So, works for me.
All right, so let's bang this out. Y'all ready?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to start with the Fight Pass prelims, 7 o'clock Eastern. First up is Jake Collier versus Vitor Miranda. And this is the same Vitor Miranda, kickboxer, Brazilian, that had a couple fights in the UFC previously, correct?
Not a couple fights in the UFC previously, but has won a couple of K1 tournaments and just fought he was on the season of Tough Brazil, same one, Antonio Carlos Jr., and he was the other finalist for the heavyweight tournament, so he lost in the finale.
Who am I thinking that fought Damian Maia? I'll check that out. Someone talk about this fight, Zane.
Okay, so yeah, Vitor Miranda was a finalist for the Tough Brazil heavyweight season. He's kind of, I guess he's exactly the kind of talent that can shine on something like Tough Brazil, but that I don't otherwise then turn around and I'm like, oh, this guy's gonna be great. He did really well on Tough Brazil. He's got a lot of miles on him. He was small for heavyweight. He's all the way down to middleweight now. That just like 2/3 of that season of the people who made it out of the show and onto the UFC immediately dropped to middleweight. Not one of them stayed at heavyweight. So that was kind of in some ways it's kind of a failed divisional build up there. But Jake Collier, he's fighting Jake Collier. Collier fights out of Pat Smith's The Pit, and he kind of came up as a self-taught MMA fighter for a long time before working up with Pat Smith, and he kind of fights like a self-taught MMA fighter. Like he does a lot of things decently, but he's got a lot of holes in everything he does too. But he's really aggressive, and he's a lot more well-rounded than Miranda, so I'm actually taking him to win his debut here.
Connor?
And I like Collier as well. Miranda, I mean, granted, he was fighting heavyweights and light heavyweights earlier throughout his career, but if we look over Vitor Miranda's record, we see him basically losing to every blue name on Wikipedia, which is not usually a great sign of somebody's potential, particularly when they are a career kickboxer and two of their losses are against Fabio Maldonado. I think if you are a career kickboxer and you can't outstrike Fabio Maldonado, there's something going wrong in transferring your skills to MMA, and I definitely think that seemed to be the case when he lost that decision to Antonio Carlos Jr. in the Ultimate Fighter Brazil finale. So, I mean, like Zane said, Collier is like a lot of these recent fighters, a lot of these recent American fighters. I guess maybe I'm just thinking of Clay Collard because their names sound similar, but a similar type of fighter. Like he's relatively aggressive, pretty well-rounded, not really super polished, but he's one of these guys who, cliche, came up training MMA and looks like a decent MMA fighter, whereas Vitor Miranda looks like a kickboxer who isn't that good at MMA. So I've got to go with Collier here.
And Mario Miranda was the cat that I was thinking about before. Betting lines agree with you too. About minus 180, 185 for Collier. Miranda's the underdog at about plus 150. Moving up to the second and final Fight Pass preliminary card, Tim the Dirty Bird Means versus Marcio Alexandre Jr. Conor Rubish.
I like Tim Means. I feel like a lot of people don't like Tim Means' fights, but I just love watching him fight. I don't even know why.
I like Tim Means because he's a mean bastard and he throws a lot of horizontal elbows.
Yeah, the elbows and the long knees and the straight leg. I don't know. I just like his style. It's not pretty. Maybe that's why I like it. It's just kind of like ugly and effective. It'll be a close fight, even though Tim Means should win this one on paper every day, because that's just kind of how Tim Means' fights are. I think you really got to bring it to him for him to respond in kind, or he's got to land something big that he can jump on. But that being said, I mean, Marcio Alexandre, he didn't look that great in the Ultimate Fighter finale. Granted, he was against Wagner Silva, who is a really solid fighter, very athletically gifted, built for MMA. But Alexandre is just like, we said this before the show, and I'm sure we said this before talking about him, if we've ever talked about him on a Vivisection prior, but he's like Lyoto Machida without all the things that makes Lyoto Machida so good at MMA. He doesn't have the stopping power in his hands. He doesn't sit down in his punches well enough. He moves a lot, but he doesn't outpoint people from the outside. He just tends to leap in and leave himself open for counters, and it's not really a good look. And he doesn't have the volume. Lyoto has at least learned to either apply volume when it's needed, or keep the opponent's volume from throwing volume before he can counter them. Whereas Marcio Alexandre finds himself in close fights where he's not throwing volume at all. And so he just gets outworked. And if one thing Tim Means can do when it's called on is to throw lots of strikes. He does that pretty damn well. And he's also a pretty solid grappler, underrated wrestler. So, yeah, I like Tim Means across the board here.
Yeah, I more or less agree with that. I unfortunately, it is one of those things. I like Tim Means. He's fun to watch. But, man, does he fight down to the level of his opposition. Mostly because he kind of requires them to set the pace for him to work at, and whatever that pace is, he tends to match it. And that could be dangerous against Alexandre Jr. because he's going to set a very slow and unexciting pace, and if Tim Means matches that, he could end up losing an ugly fight. But, yeah, he's a much more complete fighter right now. There's a chance for Marcio Alexandre to really grow a lot. I think he's one of those fighters that really didn't benefit from fighting a lot of really bad competition regionally and has a lot of holes in his game because of that. So it's kind of a thing where now that he's gone through tough and he faced Warley Alves in the finale, maybe and lost, maybe that will convince him to like patch up some holes and he could immediately come out as a better fighter. But it's hard not to pick Tim Means to win this.
I think Tim Means just has like that sparring partner mentality where it's like if you're in a fight with him, he's going to bring it to your level, but if you're not as good as him technically, he's going to kind of carry you and give you a chance to win.
Yeah, very much so.
He fights his...
You want to play like a video game, like just have him be like all offense all the time.
Oh, hell yeah. Like, with his offensive abilities, like, if Tim Means was not taking it easy on opponents who weren't as good as him, then he'd be top in his division. I mean, he's very, very skilled. He's got a really varied skill set. He's very dangerous, and every time he has every time he has a fight against a top-level guy, even when he doesn't win, it's close. He always makes the fights close. But that's the thing. They're always close no matter who he's fighting. And the only exception is like guys in his King of the Cage career who were just completely outmatched and got knocked out the first time they got hit or something like that. When he fights somebody who's a decent fighter but not as good as him, he carries him. He fights to their level like a good sparring partner but not like a great fighter.
Yeah, he's a killer when he's on the trigger. And for a long guy with real good striking, it's a nice combination to have some pretty decent, or at least not be a weak wrestler. You know, he can't really be pushed around a ton. But Means is a pretty solid favorite, minus 250 to minus 240. And Alexandre Jr. is the dog at about plus 190 to plus 195. First fight on the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card starts at 8 o'clock Eastern. First of 4, Leandro Issa versus Yuta Sasaki. Zane, tell us about Yuta Sasaki.
Well, he's one of those. He's one of the few fighters out there that's kind of giving some potential hype to the Japanese scene again, and like the potential for there to be some good Japanese fighters in the UFC. You know, who's the other guy that was recent? Michinori Tanaka was like the big hyped prospect coming in before Sasaki. And they both fought Roland Delorme for their first UFC fight. But by all means, Sasaki did way, way better and looks to be the more gifted MMA fighter. Like, he's just got super explosive transition offense, is really fast on the trigger and scrambles, and is just kind of he's a really dynamic striker, grappler kind of fighter, and a lot of fun to watch. And I think Leandro Issa plays right into his game, quite frankly. I mean, Issa is somebody who, who went deep into the third round against the, what's his name? The Wolf, Jumabek Tuarshin, the Mongolian Wolf.
Tuarshin.
Yeah. And he took it like that was a back and forth 3-round fight that Issa almost lost against Sasaki. He's not gonna get those opportunities at all. So I'm taking Sasaki by submission.
What was Tia Queen Zhang's nickname? Wasn't he the Mongol?
He was maybe he was the Mongol. Like they're both the wolf, but one of them's the Mongolian wolf and one of them's just the wolf.
Important distinction there, Connor.
Yeah.
I got to find this out because this is really Jumabika Torshin is the wild wolf.
No, he's the wild wolf, and then Tiquanjong is the Mongolian wolf.
Do you think anybody has already suggested to Jumabik that his fight nickname should be Testicular? Jumabik Testicular Torsion? Would be good, right?
That's they pay you for, Connor.
That's what I get the big bucks for. Yeah, I agree with Zane. Let's move on. Honestly, the most interesting thing about this fight to me is how Sasaki is going to look, because I love Japanese fighters who look like pretty boys and who are still very violent, effective fighters. He's not Japanese, but Do Ha Choi is kind of similar. Mm-hmm. And Sasaki's appearance reminds me of the kickboxer Kazaemon Saiga, who looks like an anime character. He has like this beautifully swept over hair and these kiss me eyes going on, and like Sasaki just has like this pretty boy look about him, and I find it hilarious to watch people like that do what he is almost certainly about to do to Leandro Issa.
Yeah.
Wow, that was a very special analysis by Connor, complete with the hair sweep gesture.
Hey, he's when he's right, he's right. Like, you know.
Zane's on board. You tell him.
I'm on board.
Right. And they're kind of good looking, but they kick some ass. Plus 20 modifier.
Kind of good looking. Dallas is on to play the man's skills here, okay?
All right, where are we at? What a fight are we talking about?
Diaz, Darren Elkins.
What are the odds?
I got a list of betting odds here. Sasaki's a big favorite. Biggest so far, at least looks like biggest of the entire preliminary cards. Minus 450 to minus 485. Issa the underdog at plus 350 to plus 370. Moving on to our next fight. This is one where, I mean, it's not, you can't really expect a barn burner as far as highlight reel footage, I suppose, but Hakran Diaz, Darren Elkins, still both like legit featherweights, and to me, the kind of featherweights that a lot of people don't want to fight because they're really tough out, and yet they don't carry like enough swagger really to like boost you up in the division. But rambling aside, Connor, take this one.
Yeah, I think not expecting a firefight might be the best way to go here. This is, after all, Darren Elkins' fight. But I think that this makes it still a pretty competitive matchup. Like, if you're not expecting it to be a blast, then you can probably still appreciate this for what it is, which is two borderline top 10, top 15 featherweights, you know, contending for gatekeeper status, really. Diaz has had kind of a rough run. He's on a 2-fight losing streak, but he's a really solid fighter. And I think the thing that he really struggles with is just pressure. Like when somebody's able to just constantly pressure him, and that's what Nick Lentz did to him, and he just struggled with that. And the thing is it was still a credible performance, because as Lentz started to tire a little bit, Diaz turned it on in the third round, and he was still trying to find and create opportunities. But Lentz's pressure won him enough of that fight to keep Diaz from pulling ahead, and that's just kind of been the story of all of his losses. Elkins is a guy who will pressure him. I mean, we basically know what Darren Elkins is going to do. The reason I think that Diaz will have a strong chance in this fight is that Elkins is not as durable as Nick Lentz by a long shot. He's a lot more fragile. He's easier to hurt. And not just easier to hurt, but he believes he's easier to hurt. He's easier to scare off. If you throw a decent 1-2 down the pipe and hit him in the chin, he's going to believe that he can't run at you like he was hoping to do. And the other thing is that Elkins has been improving his striking lately, but in the Josh Koscheck route, where he seems to be improving his striking to the detriment of his actual skill set. He's not really becoming a more well-rounded mixed martial artist. He's just becoming a wrestler who chooses not to wrestle and instead chooses to strike with supreme mediocrity. So, you know, depends on what kind of Darren Elkins we see here. If he comes in and turns in a vintage performance, yeah, he could definitely win a decision over Hakran Diaz. But if he keeps going along the route that we've seen him in his past few fights, I like Diaz to win this one. Maybe like a submission down the stretch, or just like a close decision.
Just an FYI, kind of the way that light is over your head, sometimes when it reflects down, it makes it look like your hair is parted like dead in the middle. It's a good look for you.
I've got like my my '90s Full House haircut going on.
Yeah, totally.
Or your Bud Bundy look. Zane Simon, let us have it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel really bad because I still feel like I don't have a great picture of Hakran Diaz. I honestly do think he beat Ricardo Lamas. That's like one of the few fights this year where I've really been like, that was a decision that really went against the wrong fighter. So beating Ricardo Lamas, that's a big deal to me, That tells me that Diaz is a really good fighter right now. But he also totally lost to Nick Lenz. And he did it in just because he got pressured, and that pressure took him off his game until he finally was like in the third round, he's like, oh wait, I can beat this guy any day I want, and then he started putting it on Lenz. And I don't know when that's going to show up for him, because if it's like a case of just being pressured and getting sucked into this game where you're constantly working to not be overwhelmed rather than understanding that with a little space and separation and work you can easily beat the person in front of you. Like, if that's how Diaz is going to crumble, then Darren Elkins can certainly make him crumble that way, and has a much better track record of winning those kinds of fights than Diaz does.
And the big thing is that kind of mentality is not a good sign for a guy with 25 career fights already. I mean, he's at Nova União, so you kind of like to think, oh, he has great counter wrestling and all that, and he does, but mentally he just seems to not really realize what his skills actually are.
Yeah, I mean, like, he handily beat Yuri Alcantara.
Yeah, and I think that's a hell of an impressive win. Yeah, exactly.
And so it's really hard to, like, I mean, I think I have a lot more trouble trusting that Diaz is going to show up than I do that Elkins is going to be able to pressure him and throw him off his game long enough to win a decision.
But I don't think I have enough trust in Darren Elkins' chin.
Yeah, and to me, it's kind of important to remember that Elkins, even though he's been in the UFC for a while, I want to say he was about as raw as a straight-up wrestler as you could get, and then he started, working on, actually, first to me, like, his submission grappling looked pretty good. He started really focusing on position and passing, which I think is an excellent move, and then his striking started to look better, but kind of like Connor said, it was a separate function rather than, to me, I mean, if he would use that to, like, fluidly strike his way into range before he changed levels, that would be a real nice setup for him.
And he's tough. He's caught in a tough place because when he does strike, his wrestling doesn't work. So he sometimes keeps people off track, but it doesn't make his wrestling happen. And I mean, he knocked out Antonio Carvalho, who's a solid striker, by striking with him and really catching him off guard. So that's good, but it's not that great. So against a guy like Diaz, it's definitely a disadvantage.
Well, but he's only been knocked out once, and it's not like Diaz is knocking people out either. Like, he doesn't have any power. That's like one of the big flaws in his game, is that he has no striking power.
But the worrying thing to me is that when Elkins goes entirely into wrestling mode, he is so hittable. I mean,
he is very hittable. Yes.
Watching it live, I actually almost thought that I thought that he was done when he fought Hatsa Hioki. And Hioki landed that liver shot on him. I thought it was over. And the same thing happened to him. I mean, he couldn't avoid a single punch from Chad Mendes. Granted, it's Chad Mendes, who's a hell of a striker now. But still, I mean, Elkins is either striking with you reasonably enough but not wrestling, or wrestling and getting hit in the process.
Yep.
So I'd say, actually, to your point about Hakran Diaz, that Elkins still is kind of trying to find his, when you get new skills, that's always a good thing, but then you have to get comfortable with it and make it a normal part of your strategy. So I'm not closed to the idea that he might come out, and still show a little minor to maybe moderate improvements. Either way, Hakran Diaz is the favorite, -190 to -200. Elkins is the dog at about +160. Coming up on our next one, Daniel Sarafian versus Antonio Dos Santos Jr. Got excited when I first saw this. I thought it was Dos Caros Jr. Either way, Zane, let us...
Well, that's next, is it?
No, we're missing some.
Oh, fuck off. I'm going on the best fight odds. They don't do it in order, so then every time I have to pull this other one up.
Why do you not just... Oh, I guess that's right. You have to do best right odds for the odds. Never mind.
But wait, either way, it's the same way on this lineup. I have opening up the Fox Sports 1 prelims, Issa Sasaki. Next is Hakran Diaz-Elkins, and then Dos Santos Jr. versus Serafian. Because
maybe they must have moved the card order around for the late replacement.
Yeah, here on the UFC page, we've got Tom Niinamaki versus Renato Carneiro.
I have that as the opener on the Fox Sports 1 main card at 10 o'clock.
Yet another fighter, Renato Moicano here, who is the UFC is just, without any explanation, calling him by his nickname and just letting everyone else assume that it's his real name.
Well, and partially, too, they just signed Rowan Carneiro, so Renato Carneiro and Rowan Carneiro, I think they just decided to go with give one of them his nickname. But, the official UFC.com lineup has Niinamaki Moicano next.
Yeah, and seriously, I'm not joking. I trust that the least out of all the others.
Wow.
But either way, hit us up. Whoever's turn it is, Dos Santos Jr. versus Serafian. Who wants it?
I'll talk about it. Dos Santos Jr., Daniel Serafian. This is one of those fights that if it were on a month's notice rather than a week's notice, I would probably take Antonio Dos Santos Jr. every time. Daniel Serafian is a fighter that appears to be getting noticeably worse every time he steps in the cage. And I don't know what fundamentally is going on there. It appears that it's to do with his inability to find a weight class that works for him. And that is just causing a notable slide into mediocrity. And Dos Santos Jr. is a really powerful Muay Thai striker with good offensive and defensive wrestling. And I don't Daniel Serafian's just not. I mean, he's okay at a bunch of stuff, but he's not actually good at anything. And I still feel like there's a good chance that Dos Santos Jr. wins this. I'm gonna pick him. I think it's just I can't trust Daniel Serafian even on a week's notice.
Ooh, Connor, agree?
I can't really agree with that. I think I might pick Dos Santos on more, with a full camp behind him as well. And I wouldn't be shocked if he came in here and won. But I'm not quite convinced yet that Daniel Serafian is done or that he's declining. I actually wonder if Serafian is just kind of going through that phase that we see prospects go through sometimes where he is just kind of trying to find what he does well and getting beat up sometimes and getting caught in the process. He's a guy who I think has a lot of natural talent and fighting ability. He's much like Worley Alves, who I called Worley Silva earlier, didn't I? He's much like...
You called him Wagner Silva?
You called him Wagner Silva, which is another tough Brazil fighter from that.
There's a Wagner Silva too, isn't there?
No, Wagner.
So it was a double mediocre, Connor.
Oh my God, double mediocre. But he reminds me of Worley Alves, just not in just that he's muscular and short and stocky and powerful, but he has that kind of natural explosiveness and a good sense of distance. He's very good at timing punches even without setups, just by understanding how far he is from his opponent. He is terrible at defensive wrestling. We've seen that. Like, if somebody wants to take him down, they can. But he's good at getting up off his back, and he's good with his guillotines. I mean, he's got a lot of skills that I just think are kind of floating around in the ether at this point. I'm picking him here not only because he has a full camp behind him, also because I kind of want those skills to come together, because I think he will turn out to be a very solid fighter if they do.
Can I say this really quick?
Yeah.
He's 32 and has been fighting since 2006.
Okay. Well, it's still full camp. Whatever. I'll pick him. Yeah, but 2006 with only 14 fights, it's not like he's...
No, but he's fought every year. I mean, he's working in the gym and training all throughout that time.
We'll see.
We'll see. I think it's a coin flip fight, is what I would say.
I think it's a coin flip if one side of the coin was 60% heavier than the other. I think Serafian's still got the edge here, just having had the UFC experience and just having been prepared, like the one really big flaw that he's had is that he gasses and gets tired, and it's not gonna. Dos Santos is more likely to do that than Serafian here, just based on preparation alone. So, but I do see what you're saying. I feel like Dos Santos would probably be a pretty solid bet if he's an underdog. We'll see though.
And he is a dog. I'm not that down on Serafian. I felt like people were maybe excessively high on him when he first started to make waves. So I'm kind of lukewarm on him. But
I was really like still interested in him until he got choked out by Kichi Kunimoto. That was kind of a monumental low point for me at that point. It's just like, okay, whatever.
And it made us all look like a bunch of dumbasses because we were all politely saying, what the hell is Kunimoto doing in the UFC out of all the choices that you have?
Isn't that exactly what we said? They have so many Japanese prospects to pick from, and they went with this guy. And then it really is almost verbatim. But either way, Dos Santos Jr. is the dog, plus 130 across the board. Serafian minus 165 is the favorite. So I don't really like those odds enough to make a pick, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it kind of mirrors what you guys were saying, that it's a pretty close fight, could go either way. Slight edge to Serafian, which, I mean, I think that's pretty fair. Final fight on the Fox Sports prelim. This should be a slugfest. Igor Pokrayak versus the kickboxer Marcos Rogerio de Lima. I don't know whose turn it is, so.
Connor.
Igor Pokrayak is a UFC fighter.
Prove it.
According to Wikipedia, I don't know. I mean, Pokrayak is decent, and he's always been decent. He's been in some tough fights that he's lost, and he's been in some tough fights that he's won. Like, there's a few things he does well. He's pretty solid with knees in the clinch. That's really what he does well. Everything else is just kind of, and he's a decent counter wrestler. Like, he's pretty decent at staying on his feet when he wants to. But the thing is he just doesn't have any volume or any kind of consistency. Sometimes it just looks like he's just spending rounds just letting his opponent do what they want to do. And I think that's basically been his downfall in every one of his 11 losses. He's just way too willing to let his opponent take the initiative. And ironically, the one time he didn't do that and spent much of the fight trying to go for control was when he fought Maldonado, where he spent much of that fight clinching Maldonado and pushing him against the fence and landing knees, and Maldonado still banged him up to the body. So it proved that Pokrayak is not actually that dominant in the positions that he's pretty good in. I mean, he's definitely a guy that should be in the UFC, and he should totally be testing like newcomers like Marcos Rogerio de Lima. But I think de Lima has a lot more potential for future success than Pokrayak, even if he's, it's light heavyweight. It's a depressing picture to look at this point. But de Lima looked pretty damn good in his UFC debut. As good as you can look in a 20-second knockout. I mean, it's tough to gauge a lot from his performance there, but he looked good. He looked like he knew how to throw a hard punch. Looked like he knew how to keep his feet under him when he was throwing. It wasn't like a sloppy, crazy performance. So, yeah, I like Rogerio de Lima here.
Saying.
Yeah, I do too. De Lima's been a notable prospect for a while. He's only been fighting since 2009, so he's not like way over the hill, and he's not a guy that's been plugging around for a really long time and then just finally kind of got to the UFC. Fought for Strikeforce once in a competitive bout with Mike Kyle.
Hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't he a standout kickboxer, Muay Thai fighter, leading up to his MMA career?
I don't know about that. Kickboxing's so hard to keep track of, and it's not like he doesn't have a Wikipedia page or anything that has like a list of his accolades. So I have no idea.
My memory's not good sharpest, but I do believe that he was a pretty solid kickboxer. Regardless, sorry to interrupt you though.
But he's incredibly powerful and very athletic, and he's aggressive, and all of that spells trouble for Igor Pokrayak, who's not very athletic and is powerful but not very aggressive. So it's kind of a losing. I mean, that's a pretty losing combination in general.
To me, Pokrayak is like an in-fighter to the T, like phone booth style. Like he always is right in everyone's face boxing, and now he's starting to use counter wrestling and knees in the clinch. I actually almost think he might want to use some offensive wrestling here because DeLima's a really good striker, but to me, he's going to be able to dominate Pekrayak from range because Pekrayak barely uses any kicks, and DeLima's got some nasty, nasty roundhouse kicks. Many low, but he'll bring them high too. So I'd say if Pekrayak does his normal routine, he's going to have a lot of trouble getting in the phone booth and might not even like it there once he does.
Dallas, to your question before, according to his UFC profile, he was an amateur champ in Sao Paulo, Brazil national champ, South American champion, Pan American champion. So I literally could not tell you how much these titles mean, but he is at least somewhat decorated and certainly experienced in kickboxing.
Yeah, thanks. And he's one of those guys you can tell. Like for an MMA guy, you can see when he's out there, he's got kind of that tie-drenched kickboxing style.
Yeah.
Which is pretty nasty, but actually somewhat surprising. Huge favorite, DeLima, minus, who did I say before? Oh, yeah, Sasaki's still a bigger favorite on the undercard, but DeLima minus 300 to minus 370 on one site. Pekrayak, the underdog, to the tune of plus 250 to plus 280. So because we have contrasting information here, we'll go on mine and you can yell at me if I'm wrong. This should be the opening fight on the main card, which starts on Fox Sports 1 at 10 o'clock. Either way, it doesn't really matter because the second preliminary card starts on Fox Sports 1 at 8, and the main starts at 10. So, you don't even have to flip the channel. But regardless, Renato Carneiro versus Tom Ninamaki. And you guys were saying, make sure the viewers understand, some sites are calling Renato by his nickname, which is?
Moicano.
Moicano.
Or Moisano, who knows? My God.
Keep talking, Connor.
How's that? Tom Ninamaki, what happened? I don't know. Hasn't had a very good run lately. Hasn't necessarily looked terrible, but has gotten stopped in both of his recent losses. Did he get stopped by Skelly?
Yep. Submission. Really similar submissions, really early in the first round of both fights.
And for a guy who kind of lives and dies by his grappling game, it's not really a good sign that Ninamaki is getting submitted by younger, less experienced fighters. It may indicate that he is starting a decline after a pretty long and impressive career on the European circuit. So I don't know. Tough to say. Moicano does happen to specialize in the submission that Ninamaki has fallen to in both of his last losses. He's very, very good MMA-oriented grappler with his, I think he's got 4 or 5 rear naked choke submissions to his name. And I always make these broad assumptions looking at fighters' records to evaluate them, but when I see triangle and armbar and stuff, I say, okay, they're probably not going to work in the UFC because they exist from their bottom. When I see a lot of guillotines and rear naked chokes and really good fundamental stuff like that, I start to think that this guy has what it takes to be an opportunistic submission artist, because those rear naked chokes are ones that are actually taken from a safe position. The guard is not safe. Back control is safe. If a guy can consistently get to his opponent's backs and choke them out, that's a very good sign. And Moicano's Zamer, you saying he's a jungle fight champion?
Yep, he's their interim, I believe, featherweight champion.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I have to pick Moicano here. I don't really like to pick against Ninamaki. I really like Ninamaki as a fighter. He's really fun to watch. Always turns in an interesting, eye-pleasing grappling performance, but he does not seem to be headed along the right path at this point in his career, and I think he may have just come into the UFC a little too late. So I'm going to go with Renato Moicano Carneiro.
Before I turn it over to Zane, who did Ninamaki? Maybe it was in his debut, but he fought and beat a stellar grappler. Was that Hani Yahya?
It was. He completely out-grappled Hani Yahya. It was a decision that was split, I think, that I don't think should have been a split decision. He basically just cut through Yahya's guard over and over and over again.
Which is crazy that we're talking about him getting, submitted in the first round by inferior grapplers when Yahya is a pimp.
I mean, I don't want to say that they're inferior grapplers. I mean, Skelly is a solid grappler, and
Backstrom.
Nicholas Backstrom is also a very good, and both those guys are really good at snatching up submissions in that moment of mislaid attention. But it's just not a good sign that Ninamaki is being picked off by people with so much less experience. When you build up the level of know-how and you put on the miles that he has, that's the one thing that's supposed to stop happening. You're supposed to stop being surprised by things that are thrown at you, and he's just been utterly shocked by submission attempts in his last 2 fights and been stopped. It's not a good sign for the submission specialist.
And I just meant inferior when compared to Yaya, who's an animal. I think maybe both Backstrom and Skelly. I know Skelly, but maybe more wrestling oriented. You know
Definitely.
what I mean? Like
Definitely.
60-40 on the wrestling, and where Yaya is almost all subs. All those wrestling's been.
Backstrom's like a Swedish no-gi grappling champ. I mean, he was kind of a hot shit prospect when he came to the UFC before he got starched by Mike Wilkinson in his last fight. But yeah, this is unfortunately Ron Carneiro basically exactly mirrors the skill sets of Backstrom and Skelly. I just scouted him. He was on our list for our featherweight scouting report, and I just scouted him, or did a Welcome to the UFC piece on him where I watched his tape, and he's a really good fighter, and he's already faced incredibly good competition. Like, the level of guys he's beating on the regional scene, he's got to win over, not that he's like an elite fighter, but over Iliarde dos Santos, who was in the UFC, and this was in it, Carneiro's 5th pro fight. He beat Iliarde Santos, and now he's already the Jungle Fight champion, and he's just a really good, lanky athlete, really quick back takes, really slick submissions, and a pretty decent striker. Like, not an amazingly explosive one, but technical and consistent, and works well from the outside, has a striking style that supplements his grappling game really nicely. And, not a bad wrestler, just good everywhere and a very good grappler. And this, and this is another one of those things where it's like a week's notice. But I got to take Carneiro here, and I do think that, unfortunately for Ninamaki, he didn't get to the UFC when he should have, and he's really suffering now because of it.
So maybe the short notice plays into the betting lines because Ninamaki is the favorite, -120. Carneiro's the underdog at about +100 across the board. So I think that's the first time that the panel has disagreed with the betting odds, for whatever that's worth.
What were his underdog odds?
+100.
Oh, okay.
Oh, actually,
Santos Jr. too.
He's -105 on one site, so. And that same one has, so either way, close fight, but on most sites right now, Ninamaki is the favorite. Moving forward, Mike Rhodes versus Eric Silva. St. Simon.
No. Okay, I'm going to watch this fight, and I'm going to enjoy it because it'll be a fun, exciting fight. But Mike Rhodes is getting the shaft.
What's the point of this fight?
It's to keep Eric Silva busy. I think Rhodes probably asked for it. I think he probably came out and said, I want to fight right now because I just lost and I want to prove I can win. And they gave him this one.
And who's his last loss?
Robert Whittaker.
Robert Whittaker.
And they lost to
is losing his way up the ranking. Or Mike Rhodes is losing his way up the ranking.
Yeah.
He went from very good entry fight, but tough in George Sullivan, which was even. Then he lost that, got Robert Whittaker, lost that, now is getting Mike Rhodes.
Yeah, as his competition actually increases in status.
Yes. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I don't care if Mike Rhodes asked for this. If you're his manager or if you are the UFC matchmaker, you're not going to offer him this fight because he's got a lot of potential and you want to cultivate him. And instead, they are literally throwing him into tougher fights every time, despite the fact that he's lost each of the previous ones more convincingly than the last. And
I'm sorry.
Well, I don't want to say that Eric Silva is a better fighter than Robert Whittaker, That's the thing that I guess that's the thing I really don't want to sell here. Robert Whittaker is a really, really good fighter, really solid, and is much better potentially than Eric Silva. Eric Silva's basically where he's going to be for the rest of his career. But Eric Silva's the kind of guy who can wipe out a fighter like Mike Rhodes in one round and is a very, very dangerous person. And he's higher ranked, and there's not really... I mean, if Mike Rhodes wins, I guess that's a really big deal for him, but then he's still coming off a 2-fight losing streak. I just don't see the point in this.
Well, it's a big risk because if he gets this win, he'll, leapfrog way forward. But, I mean, I think that's a tall order to walk into this fight thinking you're going to win. But go ahead, Dan.
I always even think, I think name wins are almost always bad for prospects. Like, if he wins this fight, what do they give him next? Like, Rick Story?
That's what I was gonna say. Once you beat a prospect, like, you can't go back. Once you beat a name, you can't go back. Like, you're not gonna go back to fighting guys with like barely winning records or whatever. You're not gonna be built up anymore. You're basically saying, okay, I'm gonna be pitted against this level of competition for the rest of my career now.
And I mean, it's just. And Eric Silva may not be a better fighter than Robert Whittaker, but he's a better athlete. I mean, athletically, he's a step up. He's more, he's a level above athletically. Robert Whittaker may be a better fighter or as good a fighter because he makes better use of the tools he has. He's more technical. He's more polished. But Eric Silva's kind of an amazing athlete
For a round,
but he still really can. He can do things that very few fighters can. And it's just, like, Mike Rhodes is going to lose. And he's...
Sorry. We've been kind of just beating around the bush this whole time, and Zane just finally manned up.
He's going to lose. And that's...
It's true. Zane and I are both picking Eric Silva, and it's just because Mike Rhodes is not even remotely ready for this. And honestly, I think that this may actually be there may be a silver lining here, because the best thing that could come out of this is that Mike Rhodes gets cut.
Yep.
And goes where he doesn't have the option to fight out of his depth for a year or two, where he can like get back on the trail as a hot prospect, because he's a very talented fighter. He's just not ready for the fights that he's been getting. I think we should have learned that lesson when he lost to George Sullivan, and maybe perhaps not put him against a winner of the Ultimate Fighter right after that.
Yeah.
Well, Mike Rhodes and his friends and family all just tuned out. But either way, I don't think we mean to be dicks. I mean, that is really odd to have a guy who, faces constantly increasing competition, yet, without a win. And I think we're all saying this because we were all fairly, excited, but interested in Mike Rhodes when he came in. So
I think we say this because we like Mike Rhodes as a fighter, and we don't want to see him continuing to lose to tougher and tougher competition. I would like to see Mike Rhodes put together a streak, because with a little confidence and some experience, he could beat guys like Robert Whittaker and Eric Silva in a year or two. He's got that kind of potential.
Yeah. Tough love, so we sound like assholes, but our hearts are in the right place. Let's see, Eric Silva, big favorite, -380, all the way up to -450 on one site. Rhodes is the underdog at about +315 to +335. Let's see, moving on to our next, this will be the third. I know Zane's looking forward to this one. Rashid Magomedov versus Elias Silverio.
I am really looking forward to this fight a lot, and I think it's going to be the best fight on this card, almost without question, because not only do you have, is it a style clash that'll be really fun to see, but it's a clash that basically, like, they're both strikers, but it's a clash in, like, every way you can think of two strikers clashing. Because in Rashid Magomedov, for somebody who's really not, he's flying way under a lot of fans' radars. He's one of the most technical counter fighters in the UFC. Like, just really incredibly technical and incredibly polished as a counter striker. And he's got amazingly, like, he's a tree stump when it comes to takedown defense. So it's not like, oh, he's a counter fighter who's going to end up on his back. He's a really complete fighter in his element. And what he needs to survive, to look great, is he needs aggressive opponents. And Elias Silverio is absolutely a non-stop aggressive Muay Thai striker. and a fairly technical one. A guy, he's not like the picture-perfect technique. He comes out over his feet a bit, overreaches himself, takes some power off his strikes, but he's going to come forward with a lot of aggression and with enough technique that he's not just going to get, like, shellacked out of there. He's been a lot of fun to watch and dominant in his recent fights. And so you have this matchup that's basically guaranteed to bring an action-packed, fun fight. And I'm picking Magomedov. I think he's the better fighter and more talented fighter, and this fits his style better. But it's going to be really fun.
I'm down with all of that. I think it'll be good to see Magomedov fighting to his potential, because in the last fight against Rodrigo Dam, I mean, Dam looked awful, but Magomedov did not look great against him, and in fact I think Magomedov found himself being hit more easily than in previous fights, because it was hard to gauge a guy who was not aggressive but also not technical and didn't have the kind of tells you might look for in a fighter. It was just almost hard to time Dom, despite how predictable and one-dimensional he proved to be in that fight. And Dom just did not throw any volume at him, which did not give Magomedov the opportunities he needed to counter, so he ended up doing what another counter fighter in Lyoto Machida does when the opponent doesn't charge at him, or what Anderson Silva used to do when the opponent doesn't charge at him, which is just pot shot and win really boring rounds. And Silverio is not Rodrigo Dam. Silverio is enough of a pressure fighter to push Ike Valley Flag around the octagon, which I think is a pretty impressive feat, just to walk somebody who's a come-forward fighter back like that. But he also counterpunched Ike Valley Flag when Valley Flag was coming forward. So he's shown a lot of diversity in his skill set, and he throws a lot of volume and a lot of variation. It'll be interesting because I think he will be a tough test for Magomedov. He throws a variety of kicks, punches. He's very well versed in basically all the facets of striking he needs to be. I still like Magomedov here, but I'm interested to see how he will keep from being overwhelmed, because he's going from fighting a couple of opponents who throw almost no strikes to fighting somebody who throws lots and lots and lots. It's going to be a big difference in pace. So I agree with Zane. It should be a hell of a fight, and I like Magomedov as well.
And if he comes through this looking good, I think he's due for, I was going to say a big name, but at least a bigger name. I mean, the dude's, one loss, and I mean, I think he's really solid. And if he gets by Silverio, to me, he's due to just run the guy up the flagpole a little bit and see how he does. But Magomedov is the favorite, minus 160 to minus 170. Silverio, the underdog, but not by much, plus 135 to plus 145. Moving down to the final three fights, Patrick Cummings versus Antonio Carlos Jr. Connor, I think you're up.
I think this may be one of the more interesting fights in terms of stylistic matchup on the card. It's very interesting because Cummings is a guy who's, I mean, obviously very strong wrestler and has proven to be quite proficient with his submissions on the ground. He's got good wrestlers jiu-jitsu, as Jimmy Smith from Bellator would say, where it's all kind of built around rides, taking the back, getting chokes, staying on top and maintaining position and working for safe submissions out of that. So it's very MMA. It's very MMA oriented, and Antonio Carlos Jr. is a grappling whiz himself, and may in fact be the better striker, though Cummins showed some pretty solid striking in his last fight against, my God, I just do this every single time I try to think of a name now. Against, oh my God.
Cummins, Kyle Kingsbury, Roger Narvaez.
Kingsbury, my God. I'm a terrible fight analyst. I have no idea what I'm talking about. He looked pretty solid on the feet against Kingsbury, and it was a big step up for him. It wasn't perhaps fair to Cummins to be thrown in there against Daniel Cormier, but it certainly got his name out there and allowed him into the UFC, and I think he's proven since then that he belongs in the UFC. I don't know. It's a tough fight to call. Carlos Jr. can get a little wild in the feet, but he packs some decent power. He's very good on the ground, getting up off his back. He's got excellent top game himself, but so does Patrick Cummins. I think Cummins is going to have the advantage just by virtue of his wrestling ability. And Carlos Jr. is pretty solid at stopping takedowns, too. So it's a very interesting fight stylistically, even if the names aren't really as big as you might expect. And it might not even be fun, but I'm definitely interested to see who will come away with the win. So I'm going with Patrick Cummins, but I'm expecting a pretty close fight.
Yeah, I feel like Cummins got a bit of, like, it's unfortunate for him because, you know, he got a late start in MMA, and he got, his career got seriously derailed somewhere in there by bad management, bad something, you know. There's basically no good reason that a guy should go from fighting in Strikeforce and Pro Elite to explode. You know, like,
yeah,
that doesn't make sense at all. But he, you know, finally made it to the UFC and is showing that, yeah, even at 34, he's one of the better prospects in the light heavyweight division because the light heavyweight division is that bad, and he's a good athlete with a great skill base. I think this, to me, is really a test of how good an athlete is Antonio Carlos Jr. Because on The Ultimate Fighter, you know, he subbed out Rogerio de Lima in the first round, who's not a great wrestler, and he then otherwise beat a bunch of guys who all went to middleweight, you know, or, you know, who didn't even get to the UFC at all. And Patrick Cummins is an elite athlete who possesses a skill that could neutralize Antonio Carlos Jr.'s best ability. And if Antonio Carlos Jr. is not also a very great athlete, and it's hard to tell at this point, then he loses this fight. I'm going to take him to win it. I want to see him succeed. I think that's really what it comes down to, is he's young, he's only 24, and he looks like he has the potential to be a great fighter, and this is his kind of moment to prove it. So
I agree with, you know, parts of what you both said there. I think the wrestling for Cummins is, to me, a distinct advantage, and because Carlos Jr. is just not going to have the time to catch up to that level of skill and technique. To me, it's like his grit and athleticism that's going to determine, you know, how well he defends all that. And I'm actually kind of looking forward to this one too. I think Cummins is kind of a good example of, if you come in and step up, and I guess credit to the UFC for this too. They threw him in with Cormier, which was kind of crazy, but now he's gotten his shot. It's paid off for him. You know, I think he's proven that he's definitely UFC caliber and has the potential to make some waves. He's the medium favorite, -165 to -175. Carlos Jr. minor underdog at about +40 across the board. Co-main event, Renan Barão coming back. It seems like it's been a while, but Mitch Gagnon, who I'm interested to hear what you guys have to think about this, because obviously Barão's going to be a monster's favorite, but you know, Gagnon's got the kind of game that I think, you know, could cause him fits. Question is if and how often.
I'll jump on it first. I don't think that Gagnon is going to give Barão trouble. I think he's just not experienced enough, and he's just not consistent enough as a fighter to kind of put the pressure on Barão that's needed. I think you really need like a technical striking game, or you need a really aggressive wrestling game or something like that to get to Barão. You need to get him out of his comfort zone, and he's very comfortable standing in front of you and swinging back. He doesn't mind to do that at all. He had more success than most people remember doing it, even in that beating he took from T.J. Dillashaw, when he very well may have won the second round of that fight, but people overlooked it because Dillashaw had all the momentum. Barão's very dangerous in the pocket, very, very dangerous. It takes really good footwork to move around him, which is why Dillashaw outworked him, because what Barão does, instead of picking his shots well, he will just plant his feet and swing. And if you move around him, he'll keep swinging at you even from a completely square stance. So he's vulnerable, but there aren't many strikers in all of MMA that can take advantage of a guy like that, especially when it's backed up with Barão's punching power and his chin and his love of just like swinging bombs at people. He just likes to fight that kind of fight. And I don't know. Gagnon can't do that. I mean, talk about a guy with an MMA-oriented grappling game. Gagnon's entire career is rear naked chokes and guillotines. I mean, that's absolutely what he does, and he's very good at doing it. But this is a huge, huge step up in competition for him. I just this fight doesn't make any sense to me really either. I guess they just wanted to give Barao an easy comeback fight, so that's fine. But for Gagnon, it's a rough break because I see Barao knocking him out.
Yeah, it really all comes down to the takedown, right? Because if you can't get that, it's going to be classic Barao sprawl and brawl style. So,
Yeah.
Zane, your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think the matchmaking here, a lot of it comes down to a division that's just struggling to find new young talent still a lot. Like, that's a big part of it, is that bantamweight has kind of stagnated, and a lot of the fighters that have been able to rise even have taken big fallback, or have fallen way back when they've tried to get actually up into the league. Like guys like Alex Caceres, guys like Eric Perez, that were expected to kind of come up and like, oh, this guy's looking really good. And then as they've tried to come up further, they're just not getting over that hump. So they're out there looking, okay, who do we have in this division right now that's on the rise that we can get big fights for them? And so in some ways I think I look at it like that for Gagnon, where it's just kind of like, well, you've been fighting for a little while. Let's see if you can compete at this level, because we need to find somebody who can. And also to that point, at some point, Barao's going to start falling off, and it's probably going to be a lot sooner than we'd like to think. I don't think it's going to happen in this fight, but he is a guy who started fighting at 18, and he's been around quite a while now. But this is probably not the fight where it happens. Gagnon is powerful. He's got a really efficient, powerful game for MMA. But it's not like he's putting together some sort of technical masterclass and everything. He's just kind of overwhelming people with power, and he can't do that to Barao. So
right.
It's not a good matchup for him.
I do think it's worth mentioning, maybe pressure, but at least a big spotlight on Barao coming back. After the whole Dillashaw thing, and not that it's huge, but I mean, it could be that he comes back and blows Gagnon away, and everyone starts talking about a Dillashaw rematch. Or if he looks subpar, no one will be talking about that Dillashaw rematch. So I think that's maybe just kind of an underlying story in this one.
I don't know that anyone actually wants a Dillashaw rematch. I mean, except maybe like the most Dana White evidently does, and apparently Joe Silva, and diehard Barao fans who have really run with this storyline of Joe Rogan's, that Barao was concussed in round 1 and couldn't come back. Well, Barao did try to come back and actually had some success, landed some solid shots in round 2, and Dillashaw adjusted again and beat his ass for 3 more rounds and knocked him out. I'm not really particularly interested in seeing Barao get a rematch until he's fought some other ranked fighters and maybe shown something different. Because if he's still fighting like the same Renan Barao, which he probably will be, by my estimation, what's he going to do to Dillashaw differently than he did the first time?
Well, we often see rematches turn out, in stark contrast to the original. But either way, regardless of all that, and I'm not sure yet either, but I know that this fight will influence my decision somewhat. Kind of interesting. This whole time we've been talking about, betting odds or whatever. The biggest favorites on the card are the main event and the co-main event. A hefty favorite Barao, -750 to -760. Gagnon, underdog at +525 all the way up to about +560. Main event, CB Dollaway, the Doberman. The Doberman versus the Dragon, Lyoto Machida. Zane, I think you're up for this one.
All right, this is a fight that worries me, and I'm gonna pick Machida, and I think Machida's gonna win it. He's clearly spent most of his career being a much better class of fighter than CB Dollaway. He's just off a big fight where he performed really well against Chris Weidman, but like he's not gonna last forever, and Dollaway. Like every now and then, I get that vibe, like the Jamie Varner Drew Dober vibe, where it's just like, there's no way Drew Dober beats Jamie Varner. You know, he just hasn't even shown anything remarkably, relatably close to it. And then he does. And Dollaway is a fighter that he's the prototypical guy that fans have overlooked for years on end because they've watched his entire career from raw prospect to reasonably solid, like, top-tier talent. Like, CB Dollaway right now has become a much, much better boxer and is mixing it well with his wrestling and is really, like, in his prime. And, you know, by all measure, Machida shouldn't be. Machida has looked better than ever lately, you know, in the past couple of years. But sooner or later, that ends. I don't know that it ends here. I got to pick Machida to win because he still looks great, and he has this amazingly complete game that is more functional and dangerous than it's ever been, it feels like. But there is that little tickle of doubt that's just like, what if Dollaway just comes out, rushes in on Machida, closes the distance, and just, you know, punches him as hard as he can over and over?
Well, I think Dollaway's had a bit of a circuitous path because there were times when he looked phenomenal. Like, he started working on his striking a little bit. His submission grappling seemed to become a big threat. I don't remember who it was against. Maybe it was Joe Dirksen, but he hit like a Granby roll into a guillotine, and you could tell, for some reason, Peruvian neckties coming to mind, but I don't...
That was early against Jesse Taylor.
He did hit a Peruvian necktie, though.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of submission, it's not like someone shows you that one time at practice and you can latch it on. So that's impressive, and I think he was working on little pieces of his stand-up and started to show shades of it. But then, as soon as I was getting high on him, he'd come out, and I remember it was like, I think Jared Haman.
Yep.
Round one took him down and like gassed the fuck out in like 2 minutes and got blown out. So, I mean, that's competition. You have good days and bad days, but I think he's been on the extreme end of those. Connor, lay it on us. What do you think?
I feel the same way as Zane. Like, I also have to pick Machida, and that's partly because he is an awesome fighter, pound for pound great in my mind, one of the best guys to ever do it in MMA. But it's also a bit of fanboyism. I don't want Machida to fall off. I want him to continue doing as well as he has been doing. I'd love to see him fight Chris Weidman again. I thought that he was really competitive in that fight, and it was a really interesting style clash. Not immediately, but down the road after some middleweight contenders clear up. But Stevie Dollaway is a dangerous opponent. One who... I think Zane's point about him being overlooked because we've seen all of his fights is really, really salient, because we've seen CB Dollaway look good and we've seen him look not good. And so the ones that weren't good really, really stick out in your memory when that happens. And Dollaway has been pretty damn sharp lately. Like, he's really started to put it all together. The avenue I see here from Machida is that I think when it comes to wrestlers... He's real good at stopping wrestlers. We know that. I mean, he was stopping Chris Weidman's takedowns with relative ease. He was doing that and, like, inviting Weidman to take him down again. Like, he was, oh, God damn it. Just really putting on a brilliant counter wrestling performance. The thing he struggled with against Weidman was Weidman's combination punching ability. And Weidman was hurting him because he was able to stay in the pocket and throw punches with Machida. And Gegard Mousasi had some close moments in their fight as well. When he got close enough to throw combinations and threw 3, 4, 5 punches, one after the other, one of those tagged Machida. He doesn't have that wrestling style or that boxing style defense. Doesn't move his head very well. You know, when you're picking off shots with your hands, at some point your hands are out of position to catch the next shot coming your way when somebody's throwing sequences of strikes. And that's why I feel a little confident picking Machida here, because Dollaway's not a particularly sharp combination puncher. He's actually really good as a counter boxer himself. That's really where he seems to shine on the feet. And when forced to come forward, he's so-so. He didn't exactly look phenomenal. What's that?
Yeah, I agree. His aggressive striking is much poorer.
Yeah, and when he was forced to do that against Francis Carmont didn't look that great. In fact, Carmont was doing what I expect Machida to do and just blasting him with big kicks from the outside, and Machida is a much better kicker than Carmont. He doesn't shout quite as loud or look as big, but he actually lands his kicks to the body and the head with surprising accuracy, and he's turned into a really powerful, fast kicker as well in recent years. He's really added some zest to that left body kick. So, yeah, I like Machida here. I'm not going to be shocked if Dollaway wins. But I still think Machida's got it. I think he really proved that in his move to middleweight so far, and I haven't really seen any signs of him slowing down yet. So I'm going with Lyoto Machida.
Were you going to say something, Zane?
Yeah, I was just saying, at the end of the day, this is not the fight to pick against Machida. I think that's what I want to, like, I want to make that clear. Like, this is not that fight. But it could be
the fight to indicate that we should pick against Machida next time.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of, if you think about it, though, and I do appreciate everyone giving CB a fair shake, and he has a little bit of that, because he's been inconsistent, sometimes that's a downer, but then if he could be in, surprisingly top form, I think that's what keeps us all interested. On the flip side of that, if there's a prototypical kind of fighter that Machida has steamrolled, this is it, you know what I mean? It's a wrestling-based fighter who's built his striking up enough to be somewhere between serviceable to pretty good, I mean, Bader, Couture, all those guys, and it takes a very special kind of fighter to beat Machida. And Connor, you had a good point. He does so much, hand trapping and parrying. That's what puts so much emphasis on him being in and out. And so to me, this should be, and I think, not to ramble on too long, but part of the reason he stayed in the pocket with Weidman is because he's always been battling this aggression thing where people don't think he's aggressive enough. But to me, this should be like classic Machida style that he's used from the beginning. Be elusive, use a shitload of footwork, a shitload of feints. Dollaway's done really well with his striking. It's almost all boxing. But a lot of times you don't even get a chance to use that against Machida. It's about how many feints you cut coming into range. I think if he were to get in the pocket with Machida, he would do pretty well. But usually, man, Machida's got excellent takedown defense. He's all angles. The reason his takedown defense is so good, every time he gets locked up or body locked, he almost always takes one step just to create a new angle, and all of a sudden that changes the game. And as soon as you realize that and adjust, he's already, flitting out of reach. So I do think Dollaway has somewhat of a chance. I would be shocked. Not that it's inconceivable, but I think it's a really, really tough matchup for him. Minus 600 for the Dragon, minus 700 on one site. Dollaway plus 450 to plus 472 for the range as an underdog. And actually, to me, that's a little high. I think when you get high-level guys like this, even though it's a terrible matchup, and I'm glad I'm not making the betting odds, but I don't know. I mean, if I had, $5 laying around the house, I'd put that on Dollaway for those odds. You think that's a risk of a whole Finsky?
I don't know. I don't really like any of the odds on this card. I don't know. None of these numbers really speak to me. Like, all the ones that have big underdogs are ones where I think the underdogs kind of deserve to be, and where even if I think they're competitive, like Dollaway, I don't at all feel secure picking Dollaway against Machida. I just worry about what Dollaway could do. So I don't know. I think Carnero at plus 100 is literally the only odd that I wrote down as being worth a bet.
And that's actually a good point, because really, if I were going to lay money on this card, it would probably be that $5 and change in between the couch cushions on Dollaway. Otherwise, I don't feel strongly really on any other ones, even Gagnon. Zane, do you have any betting advice for this one?
Stay away from it. This is like the close fights are a lot of coin flips and a lot of fights that I wouldn't be surprised if they went one way or the other. But most of the big fights are pretty one-sided. Like, my fear about Dollaway beating Machida has nothing to do with the matchup of Dollaway versus Machida. I think Machida wins that matchup every single time. It's just my fear of eventual fighter. When you have a guy who's well past the point of a normal career, and he's continually fighting guys who are in their prime. Because this is Dollaway's in his prime right now. This is, these are the best years of Dollaway's career that we're watching. And when you keep giving guys guys in their prime, sooner or later you get a weird upset that you get a loss that just doesn't make sense. You aren't ready for. And that would be my fear, but it has nothing to do with the ability of Dollaway on his own skill and merit to beat Machida. Yeah. So it's hard for me to then look at him and be like, he's going to beat him. Pick Dollaway.
And that's a good point. Usually I'm not big on that line of thinking until a guy shows it, but with a guy like Machida, he's an anomaly because he's been fighting at the top level for so long, and now the reason he's an anomaly is because, damn, I mean, the end is looming, even though he hasn't really shown anything about it or shown any signs of it. What the hell else? Oh, I think the Phil Davis and Machida fight is I was really surprised by that because I think we've all termed Phil Davis's striking as somewhat sluggish, slow. I wouldn't call him an explosive striker.
He's the absolute opposite of an explosive striker.
Yeah,
he's an implosive striker.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like he's waiting around in melted cheese when he throws a lot of it. But however, I don't mean that as a knock on Phil, because even though I still strongly disagree with that decision, he showed, like, Dollaway's quicker, he's more athletic, he's got more snap on his punches, he can change levels probably faster, not with as much technique. But
like I said, Dollaway can fight off the back foot pretty well. Like if Dollaway does decide to bait Machida into coming forward, like he has been doing so much lately, then, I mean, he could win the fight like that. He could actually win on the feet just by forcing Machida to come forward and catching him with counters. But the thing is like I think Davis just threw a lot of volume in that fight, and it's not something that Dollaway typically does. He doesn't have the kicks to work at range, so he's going to need to be in punching range. And since he likes to throw the cross as a counter, I think he's going to be throwing himself forward into Machida coming forward. I don't know. I think Machida's also improved since that Phil Davis fight in terms of his come forward ability. Like the Phil Davis fight was the first time we really saw it where he was willing to come forward a lot. Since then, he's added in some really good, like, intimidating strikes, the kind of strikes that make you want to keep backing up and not stand still and strike with him. Specifically, that left kick to the body. Like, everybody he's thrown that against has not liked it. And I think he's hurt everybody to the body that he's used that kick against. He hurt Gegard Mousasi. Mousasi's just tough as nails, so I didn't really show it, but he hit him in the head a bunch of times as well. He knocked out Mark Munoz. He hurt Chris Weidman with a liver shot. I mean, that left kick has been a staple of his game, and it's really allowed him to kind of explode forward and push guys around like he never used to do in his career before. So I've got to pick the experienced, really talented veteran who is somehow still adding tools to his game over the prospect who doesn't seem to have the style to beat him.
Yeah, that left roundhouse kick to the body is one of his secret weapons, and the other one is just that he'll just stand in place, and a lot of times he's not necessarily retreating hard, but backing up, and he'll hold his ground and just like spear a knee right up the middle of the pocket.
Oh, yeah.
Those are like staples of his offense that don't get a lot of love, but just tricky tools. And actually, I think, with Davis, with his kicks, even though they weren't pretty, that might be, if we were to draw a correlation on, wrestle boxers that Machida's just curb stomped in the past, that's one difference. Bader doesn't really throw any kicks, and with Davis, it was, maybe not highly effective, but it was something at range that he could throw to keep Machida somewhat occupied.
And Chris Weidman threw kicks, and they weren't great kicks, but he threw them, if only just to convince Machida that he didn't have a huge advantage in that one area of the fight.
And that's what I mean. To me, that's something like really that's credit to Weidman that he probably won't get any love for, but just the fact that he filled that normally empty void with some kicks. All of a sudden, it wasn't, this is an area where I can trounce this dude. He's throwing me something that I have to deal with.
Yeah, you can't concede an area of striking to Machida, particularly not one at which he has become more and more dangerous over time.
I mean, the most dominant of all time, I'd put him up there with Chuck Liddell as far as range striking. I mean, all time, does anyone come to mind for that? I'll take that as a no. No one comes to mind, Alice. What was that?
Anderson Silva.
Oh yeah, for sure. Good catch, absolutely.
I will say I've been picking Lyoto to beat Anderson for years, in that dream matchup that will never happen. it's been years now where I've been thinking that Lyoto would beat Anderson, and I think more. I mean, obviously more now than ever because Anderson's been hurt, but also because Machida has just become a more varied striker over time. Whereas Anderson slowly started to become a guy who really pared down his game. Machida's actually adding more tools, and he's actually doing some things that are a little riskier. Like the fact that he was throwing overhand lefts at Chris Weidman and like closing range with these big punches. I think that's a little bit of Rafael Cordero's training on him. You know, just teaching him like you don't have to do everything right if you're aggressive and you push the guy, especially when he seems close to breaking. And that's what Machida did to Weidman. He tried to break him. It's not something that Machida used to do.
Well, and it's something beautiful because Machida is like, the definition of fluid, like traditional martial arts. It's all poetic, and that's why I like it. Mix it with some good old-fashioned, shootbox brawling. It's a really nice contrast.
Yeah,
that's right. All right, we're gonna close it down. You guys want to list your Twitters, sell yourself, sell your bodies? Do it now.
You can find me and my body on Twitter at BoxingBush, BUSCH, and I should have an episode of Heavy Hands coming out today, so check that out too.
Does your cat got a Twitter?
No, she's not allowed.
You can find me on Twitter at DZaneSimon, and I'll be doing an episode of the MMA Prospectus tomorrow. And keep your eyes peeled for the Featherweight Scouting Report, which will be coming up next month.
All right, y'all. I'm at Uncle Justice on Twitter. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you soon.